Hi, everybody. Here we are again, Monday night at 7 p.m. As usual, I don't know if you're seeing me or hearing me properly, so if you ever have any problem, please chat and let me know. Of course, you can use your chat function throughout to ask any questions or make comments. I really appreciate getting some feedback as we go and we talk about our films. Um, this is a very, very exciting film for me to talk about. The Apartment, 1960, of course. Quite an unusual film. I hadn't seen it probably in 20, 25 years. So it was kind of very cool to watch again and recognize the unbelievable mastery of Billy Wilder and what he managed to do with this film and with this very difficult subject matter and how it sort of was such an incredible feat in 1960 to accomplish what he did. And that's the film we'll be talking about tonight. And anyhow, it's just been great doing. This is our ninth film talk, and of course the film clubs continue on. And anybody who'd like to get more information about any of this, of course, you can always go to the westdale.ca, our website, and you'll hear more about all the different online programming that we're doing while the theater still remains closed because of the pandemic. So this is just our way of trying to continue to stay in touch with our community and help and share our passion and love for film. And what can I say? I think it's been a lot of fun for me, and I hope it's entertaining for you. So let's talk about The Apartment, 1960. And as I said, this was produced and directed by Billy Wilder. It was an original screenplay he co-wrote with I.A. Diamond, and of course stars Jack Lemmon, Shirley MacLaine, and Fred MacMurray. This was actually the second script he wrote with I.A. Diamond. This was a new writing partner. Billy Wilder had for many years been a fantastic screenwriter, actually started in Hollywood as a screenwriter before he became a director. And he always worked with a partner named Charles Brackett. And Charles was quite a conservative kind of Protestant guy. And when we'll talk about some of the movies they did together, and they had a very specific kind of approach and developed basically they really created film noir as we know it. But this new writer was quite different, and also a European Jew like Billy. And they had a very interesting relationship. And how they worked together is very much a reflection of what you see in the movies. So the first film they had done together was Some Like It Hot, which was in 1959, which of course is perhaps Billy Wilder's best known film and was incredibly successful. And it was after that film and the first film that Wilder had ever done with Jack Lemmon that there was sort of this interest in doing another film with Jack starring, and this idea got cooked up, and what do you know? Here they wound up making this absolutely extraordinary movie. When it opened, it had very favorable reviews and commercial success, which was kind of extraordinary because it was a very controversial subject matter that he was dealing with. But at the Academy Awards, it was nominated for 10 awards, and it won 5: Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Screenplay, all for Billy Wilder. I think that's the only time that happened where one individual won them all. Lemmon and MacLaine were also nominated but did not win, but they also both won Golden Globe Awards for their performances. So, again, to me, this film is remarkable because it really is a very blistering commentary on contemporary society in 1960 and the amoral inhabitants and the kind of sacrifice or the approach that many people were taking towards sort of the urbanization of our society and the people in a new kind of workplace where they were so focused on success in the corporate world. It was very controversial with the production code. It was still in effect at the time, but that was what was kind of so remarkable is that what Billy Wilder was interested, which was this very, very focused kind of satire almost of contemporary humor. And by giving it so much heart, giving it humor, giving it pathos, and he was able to navigate that kind of controversy and pull off this script. And obviously, it's a movie about people having affairs and really, some very amoral behavior. But he was able to get it through them. One reviewer at the time called the screenplay a chocolate covered cherry flavored with hemlock, because of course there was so much immoral behavior in the movie, which isn't really commented on or judged. It's just very frank and situationally accurate, right? And again, this was very much a sociological phenomenon of the time. I don't know how much you're familiar with 1960 in New York, but this was a time where prosperity was exploding, in American society, just sort of off the charts. And these high rises and these office buildings and really, created a different life experience from the past where people worked in factories and used their hands and had craftsmanship. And really, there was sort of a little more of a traditional meritocracy as people became successful. Here in this corporate world, and of course there's still parallels to today, but this was sort of new in 1960, was the idea that being loyal to the corporation was the most important thing you could do, and that's how you would get happiness, and that's how you would get success, and whether that you had any skill or particular ability or talent may not have been as important as your loyalty and willingness to do whatever it took to survive and be successful in this new kind of corporate world. The classic, expression for this new kind of worker was, man in the gray flannel suit, and you'll certainly, remember in that very famous opening scene at the office, where which is a direct tribute to King Vidor and the crowd, where we first discover, Baxter, sitting there amongst these hundreds of people and performing his very menial job, which I'm not even sure we really understand what he actually does. And then, of course, by the end of the movie, he's in the, junior executive paneled office. And of course, none of this had anything to do with his ability to do his job or anything else. It was very much, though, how, Wilder and others perceived what was happening in America at the time. Kind of, incomprehensible, but maybe not so. But again, this is this idea that the organizational man, is willing to do everything. But in this case, of course, he becomes sort of the unwitting accomplice in kind of his own, sabotaging his own romantic interests. But, so much of what this movie is about is that context. Because in 1960, we were really, there was this cultural movement. We were moving into this more permissive era that was, of course, going to explode in the later 60s. And sort of that uncertainty of what was moral, what wasn't moral, the characters are a bit adrift in a confusion of what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, and certainly human sexual relationships and courtship were being transformed, and and again this uncertainty left to create a lot of anxiety for people too. And so this is quite a bit of intense material that Wilder was interested in, and of course and making social comment, and he chose to do it as a comedy, because if this had, and it's not that Wilder didn't do dramatic films, Sunset Boulevard, Double Indemnity, he Stalag 17, he was a master of dramatic films, but he chose to tell this story because this is a subject that he was really interested in as a comedy, and I think that was, in a sense, what I find the most brilliant thing about it, is that somehow he's able to, master that incredible balance between the comedy, real human emotion, the satirical or critical analysis and presentation of what, what life was like. But this was always, the same for Wilder. He was always more interested in sort of human nature. He didn't really take on big political stories or he was in, or famous historical characters. He was always much more interested in just human nature and the issues that kind of confront ordinary people. And of course, these are very ordinary people we're meeting. And he has a very interesting quote I found, which he says, "I'm an artist, but I'm a man who makes motion pictures for a mass audience. And I'm making pictures on all levels. So to be a mechanic working in a back alley garage, tinkering away for years and coming out with one little automobile, that's one thing. But to work on an assembly line and come out with a Cadillac, that is something else. And that is what I'm trying to do here." So this was a very pragmatic artist working within that Hollywood studio system, who recognized that he was actually making films on many different levels, and again, depending on the audience and what they could appreciate and what they brought to the film, would affect people on many different levels. And that's a very sophisticated approach. And in 1960, he was really at the height of his powers. In fact, this was probably the last great film that he ever made. So anyhow, he started, of course, as a writer, and that's very important because for him, the script was always the most important thing. There wasn't any improvising on a Billy Wilder movie. You did the words that were in the script. And he began as a writer, and of course he was Austrian originally, but was in Berlin before the war, and started working as a screenwriter, and came to the U.S. and he was a very successful screenwriter, and often worked with Ernst Lubitsch. And I don't know if you know that director or not, but he was probably the greatest director of the time. This is in the in the late 20s and early 30s, and just had an amazing skill. And the one that Wilder wrote for him was called Ninotchka with Greta Garbo. But if you're interested in all, and because Wilder really was so heavily influenced by that director, some of the other movies that Lubitsch did that you might or might not know is Trouble in Paradise and Design for Living and Shop Around the Corner and To Be or Not to Be. I mean, one of my favorite directors, and I'd love to do one of his films sometime. There's one little bit of improvisation actually in the film, and the only improvisation actually was when Jack Lemmon, when he's cooking spaghetti, starts to sing his little Italian fake aria, and he's straining the spaghetti with his tennis racket. If you remember this absolutely charming scene, and that's sort of a little bit of a what one would call the Lubitsch touch. And then another perfect example of the influence of Lubitsch was the little makeup case with the cracked mirror. This is a very classic kind of Lubitsch touch where at first he finds this little makeup case, and then he wants to make sure that Sheldrake knows, he didn't break the mirror, has a broken mirror. And then we sort of find out, well, it's broken because she threw it at Sheldrake, and that's why it broke. And then, of course, he's given it back to Fran at some point. And then, of course, the moment when Baxter sees this cracked mirror, and that it's Fran's cracked, and he puts together, what's been happening. So that's, it's just brilliant. It's all done without dialogue. You have this great shot of Shirley MacLaine, in the mirror with this fractured image. And she even makes some comment about, that's how she feels about herself or about life. But of course, that's not even the point. The point is that you've now revealed this very important part of the narrative, and it's all done sort of without dialogue, just using this little prop, right? So kind of amazing. Again, my love for Wilder's mostly came from his really creating the film noir, style. His first was Double Indemnity, a James Cain book. He actually co-wrote that with Raymond Chandler, the novelist who wrote The Big Sleep. He's won, any number of Academy Awards and had so many other great classics. There were actually 14 different actors who got Academy Award nominations, working on films with him. Um, and he always had this kind of relationship with the Hays Code, because if you think about Double Indemnity, which is all about adultery, he was able to, pull that off. And then, of course, the film noir was influenced by, Citizen Kane and Maltese Falcon, but it was really Wilder, I think, who kind of also popularized it and kind of elevated it to even a higher level of drama. Again, his primary interest was writing. So, he really did avoid kind of that exuberant cinematography, that, we've seen with Alfred Hitchcock or Orson Welles. And he was so conscious of not wanting to do shots that called attention to themselves and would distract the audience from this story. So there are some interesting photographic elements to the department we'll talk about, but for the most part, you're not terribly conscious of the camera and camera movement, and obviously there's composition, but that was not what he was primarily interested. He was interested in really tight plotting, memorable dialogue. So it's a very conservative directorial style in terms of visuals, but in terms of subject matter, he was always pushing the envelope in different ways. And again, he wasn't necessarily known as a fantastic actor's director, but never, because again, he really wanted them to follow the script. It wasn't like they could just be their personalities. He often had to battle with the actors to make sure that they do it his way. The most famous example, of course, is William Holden in Stalag 17. This was Holden was a very popular romantic lead, and he was forced to play this very, kind of unlikable character, but he wound up winning an Academy Award. And then Wilder would often cast people against type. So Fred MacMurray, of course, is the perfect example, because here, he is in the apartment and he's known as this decent character, does light comedies and musicals and went on to be, My Three Sons. And of course, here he's cast as a, womanizing schemer, But there's something about that awareness of him as a movie star that the audience brings to this that I think actually makes that character more interesting and somehow relatable in a way that it may not have worked otherwise. And of course, he's most famous for his, getting the performance from Marilyn Monroe on Some Like It Hot, because that was probably her greatest performance, and I'm not sure she ever, did anything quite up to that par. And then he's also famous, of course, because he's the one who first paired Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau in a film called The Fortune Cookie. And after these two films, Lemmon went on to star in 7 of Billy Wilder's films. And often you'll see that where a director and an actor create a relationship that really is sustainable, and they'll repeat and keep working together, for many, many years. So the idea for this film actually came from Billy Wilder watching a great David Lean movie called Brief Encounter, which I think was that must have been in the late, let's see, it was probably in the 40s, early 40s, and it was like 14 years later. But he made a note at the time, like to do a movie about a guy who climbs into the warm bed left by 2 lovers, and that was a basis for a movie. So the idea here, of course, is that he couldn't make this movie because it was a movie about adultery, and it had been a British movie, so they didn't have the same production code restrictions. So he sort of had to wait on this idea for quite a while until he actually decided he could manipulate this story of adultery into an acceptable film for the production code. It was also inspired by an interesting, famous story about a producer named William Wanger, who wound up shooting a agent called Jennings Lang in an apartment where he was having an affair with Wanger's, love, Joan Bennett, and it was the same idea, though. There was a young agent at the agency who would allow the agents to use his apartment. Actually, it was Jay Cantor who became a very famous agent. And I just found out this afternoon that a friend of mine in Hollywood, Rocky Lang, is Jenny Lang's son, and confirmed that this indeed happened, and his father did indeed was shot by William Wanger. And it's kind of amazing that Hollywood, as you know, behind the scenes is often more fantastic than what actually happens in the movies. So again, but I.A. Diamond, was very important to this collaboration. They wrote 12 movies over 25 years, and often they were sort of like these sort of volleying movies of two characters, like in Some Like It Hot, Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon, where there's this wonderful, and then Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon, where they would play these relationships, and with two characters who could verbally squabble and friendly squabble all the time, and according to I.A. Diamond's wife, that was her husband's relationship with Wilder. So they would simply sit there and do those kinds of squabbles and write them into the screenplay. It always worked incredibly well. And then of course we'll talk a little more about Miss Kubelik, because what Shirley MacLaine and again what Wilder did with that character was quite extraordinary, and really kind of anchored the movie. I don't know what to say. She's not just a ditzy dame who's fallen for a smooth talker. She's certainly a woman who's been lied to before. She has a good heart, but finite patience, and she's trying to navigate this relationship and becoming Mrs. Seldrake, as he keeps promising her. But it really, the seriousness of her performance, I think, and the way the character was created really is what holds this movie together. So it doesn't just become sort of a sitcom or sort of some kind of unrealistic thing. So again, what really I love about Wilder is sort of this adult sensibility. The characters don't just fit into formula plots. Often in his films like this one, the characters actually work for a living. They go to jobs, they have responsibilities, they have, they're living in sort of the real world. In so many movies, characters just kind of exist in this bubble of the movie, and you don't really know what or care what they actually do for their life. It's interesting that when you look at the script and the film, these are two European Jews collaborating on this kind of wiseacre kind of take, and it's sort of an assimilation in reverse, right? Because all the central characters, Lemmon, MacLaine, and McMurray, are all Gentiles, right? But almost all the supporting characters are Jewish, and sometimes with some significant kind of affectionate caricatures, especially the doctor's wife, of course, is wonderful performance and great warm-hearted character. So there is a caricature element, and then of course in some of the dialogue, talking about, of course, the mensch being a mensch, and they mention the whole schmear, he wins, and the Meshuggah, and calling him schnook, there's all nebbish, there's all of this wonderful, Yiddish and Jewish stuff here. But again, it's quite extraordinary to me. Just I don't know how the audience responded at the time, but if you really look at that kind of relationship and the way they create these characters, it's really I found it very interesting watching this time. And even and again, the Dr. Dreyfus I thought was just a fantastic character, and really again brought so much heart and really made this something so exciting. But again, I think Wilder's pulled this off. There's this thin line between cynicism, and he was a pretty cynical guy, and sentimentality, and there are times when this starts to waver into that sentimentality. That's a very, very, you really need a deft touch to be able to pull that off. And Lemmon, of course, did need a firm hand, because he would have a tendency to stray, into sort of, mawkish excess. He did a film soon after this called Days of Wine and Roses that got a lot of attention. It was a very kind of bravo performance by Lemon, but he kind of goes over the top. And here, although his on the surface his behavior is deplorable, right? but somehow Lemon invests him with that kind of precisely calibrated measure of pathos. And I think we're rooting for him all the way, even though, he's a pimp, pimping out his apartment to these girls, to these guys who just want to screw these girls. But, we're not critical of him. We sort of accept that his naivete and his innocence and his good-heartedness. And somehow we even accept this obsession of, succeeding in work, because that's all he has, right? We never find out about any family he has. We never find out, where he came from. He doesn't seem to, be very good, or, well, we don't even know what he actually does. And that sort of, is interesting to me that, and again, I think very, very clearly, what Wilder had intended to, in terms of his social commentary. So during the development, they really, got to make this pretty quickly. They wrote the script. They wanted to make a film with Lemon. Of course, they were hugely successful with Some Like It Hot, so anybody would back this film. Sheldrake was not Fred MacMurray originally. It was going to be Paul Douglas. I don't know if you remember him, but a great character actor. And he died unexpectedly. And they got MacMurray to agree, which was kind of extraordinary, because MacMurray was one of the highest paid actors in Hollywood at the time. And for him to take this role was, sort of a little risky on his part, I would imagine. So, but he did agree to do it, and I think it, of course, he actually did go on to do some other very interesting, work as well. So, what else could I tell you about it? Yeah, the famous story. And again, it's so interesting the setting of the film, right? Because it takes place, at Christmas time. It's not, there's not over a long period of time. The streets are cold. It's sort of dark. Christmas Eve, is sort of interesting that this is all happening, and New Year's during this so-called happy time, right? Kind of amazing, really, that in fact, one of the choices was to shoot the film in black and white, which was not that common in 1960. There were still some films made in black and white, but it was unusual. But they particularly chose black and white because they were concerned that if it was a color film, that some of the scenes, like the famous Christmas party, which we'll talk about, and in color would just sort of be too bright, too real, too happy, and would sort of lose the mood of the film. So I think that choice of shooting the film in black and white was obviously an important one, and really is a great example of how smart directors use visual style and different color, black and white, whatever, to really marry with the content of their script, right? And they do what it takes. It's similar to Spielberg shooting Schindler's List in black and white. You can't even imagine that film being done in color. So I think that actually worked very, very well, and made a big difference. This was a seminal film for Lemon because he had always done light comedy and was known as doing that pretty good. But this was the first film that he really did that had, a dramatic, heart to it as well. And this was really considered sort of a key transition in Lemon's career. And certainly, he went on to do some great film and won an Academy Award for Save the Tiger. I don't know if you know that movie. It's a very, very small movie, but a brilliant movie, and one of Jack Lemmon's greatest performances. And it was also a seminal film for Shirley MacLaine. She had been around for 4 or 5 years, mostly doing, light comedies and small little parts to it. But this was really the film that also helped her emerge as sort of a serious actress. And of course, in the 60s, she went on to do, so many wonderful films. Again, Fred MacMurray to me is so unusual in this film because his debauchery, it's almost like comically conventional. We feel like, we've seen this kind of guy before. And, infidelity, betrayal, abuse of power, the girl commits suicide. These are all very serious shit, right? But nevertheless, somehow the dialogue and his performance manages, to lighten the tone. And I don't know, maybe it's because it's Fred MacMurray. We all know that, this guy is just awful, awful, awful human being, but it doesn't kind of, take us out of a mood or that we're feeling, which allows us to enjoy this comedic kind of movie. It's really, the side characters are all amazing. Ray Walston, my favorite Martian, was one of the friends. Edie Adams is the secretary. I've always loved Edie Adams. She's a fantastic comedian. And of course, she's very important to the plot when she makes that decision to call Sheldrake's wife and spill the beans. I don't know if you know, but she was married to Ernie Kovacs, who was probably the first great TV star. This amazingly brilliant comedian. He had the Ernie Kovacs show. Well, maybe I'm dating myself at this point, but one of the greatest TV shows ever done. And this is back in the '50s. There's that one, Wilder had a very tense relationship with Marilyn Monroe from Some Like It Hot. And so we have this very kind of ungallant joke about her, where, we have this character appear, at the bar as one of the girls who picks up, it was very obviously doing her Marilyn Monroe impression and not really a character of any substance or meaningfulness. But we do have this other wonderful woman character that Hope Holiday, a great character actress, plays, who's the girl that Baxter picks up at the bar that night. Who has the husband who's the jockey in prison in Cuba. I find her fantastic in her part, and that relationship and chemistry of how they meet and dance together and all this is just great. So again, the actors, production was pretty straightforward. The challenge, of course, was to create this kind of world and of course the apartment, because as they say, often sets are, a character or location's a character in a movie. Well, this set, the apartment, was clearly a major character in the film, and many of the scenes take place there. But kind of really, extraordinary how they did it. And the art director, especially the set of that large insurance company. So, this was before, of course, digital effects or duplicating extras or everything. So how they actually did this set is with forced perspective. So, as you certainly see, Baxter's kind of towards the front of the set. So what they did is, as the set moved further back, they would kept making the desks smaller and the people who sat at the desks smaller. And in fact, in the back of the set, those are actually kids dressed up as adults who are sitting at these little desks. And that's actually, that forced perspective is what gives you this incredibly overwhelming feeling about this set and sort of the how anonymous these people are. Of course, there were no cubicles yet, so everybody's just sort of lined up together. And amazing design. In fact, he won an Academy Award for production design for this movie, even though there's nothing terribly dramatic or overwhelming. The outside of the apartment was actually also, on the back lot. They did not shoot in New York for that. They did some small stuff in New York, but a lot of it was actually still done on stage or on the back lot because, controlling the weather and everything else. Originally, Billy Wilder wanted to shoot the entire movie in New York, but it certainly became somewhat unpractical. The apartment is an incredible set, and there was sort of this shabbiness to it. In those days, films were often somewhat unrealistic, and people live in these beautiful, spacious apartments, even though they had mediocre jobs, and you never really could understand how they could afford them. But maybe that's, just looked better or gave the director more room to work. So this is quite a small little shabby, kind of apartment and set. And of course, what's so interesting is how very prominent the door to the bedroom is. Because if you remember, it's sort of directly in the middle of most shots, right? Because the way it's positioned sort of at the back of the set. And so there's sort of always this sense of the bedroom, where all the action's going to take place, looming behind everything else. And I just think they did, incredible job. And, it was all decorated with thrift store furniture and, you know, but even though, again, black and white, it was photographed in widescreen, right? Which was a choice that Wilder made. And again, I often feel like sometimes this is counterintuitive because it wasn't because of the landscape, it wasn't because of, the power of whatever, we're, recreating something, spectacular. It was because it really allowed him to do more photography, more scenes in two shots, right? You can do less cutting when you have a widescreen film, and also gave you a bigger image. And therefore, when you were in close up with these actors, you were really right in their eyes. You could see what they were thinking. You could see the subtleties of their performance. And I think that is, really works well. And if you haven't seen this on the widescreen in the movie theater, I hope one day you will, because it'll kind of surprise you. Also the widescreen kind of emphasizes and separates characters, and there's more, when you feel a character on either side of a widescreen image, you can really feel the emptiness. And I think that's also part of it, what he was trying to do. They also had the wonderful opportunity to use this new Panavision camera lens that didn't create distortion as they did in the old days. And then, of course, there was this wonderful use of sort of little props, the key, with the mistake about the key and the bathroom key, and then, of course, at the end, Sheldrake thinks that he's gone along with his proposal to Baxter, but of course, what he gave him was the bathroom key, not the key to the apartment, and that was his way of telling, Sheldrake that he was quitting. Kind of amazing, right? Again, these little subtle use of props and like the mirror, the makeup, little makeup mirror, I think is amazing too. It's funny, they do the one shot of Fred MacMurray with his family, and it's Christmas, and his son's asking him about, rocket ships. And, I think that was sort of a little wink to, this other Fred MacMurray we all knew, but because it really didn't have anything to do with the plot of our movie at all. But again, it's Wilder being very sophisticated about these little moments that really help us to get inside a character and really enjoy them. Shirley MacLaine to me is amazing in this film, and Jack Lemmon too. And it's interesting because at the end of the day, this film is not rushed. It's over 2.5 hours, and some people, I don't know, maybe you found it slow or somehow nothing was happening. And certainly in the first half hour, there's really not that much action or tension. But this is a film where these actors are given the opportunity to really immerse themselves in these characters and really bring them to life in such a wonderful kind of real and textured way. And not always even through dialogue, just through sort of behavior, there's they weren't method actors, the way we have method actors and what happened with Actors Studio. But one of my favorite Actors Studio actors is Bruce Dern. And Bruce Dern always talks about sort of moment to moment behavior, and that that's when you can really what he really admires in actors' performances, and what he was always trying to achieve himself is this ability to be so involved in your character and so much conscious of what the character was feeling and thinking, that every moment of behavior reflects that character. You don't sort of just turn off when someone else is talking, or there are any moments where you're not fully present and fully centered. And I felt that happened in both these characters. And all those little touches is what, even, why do we like Jack Lemmon? Well, those scenes where, at the beginning where he has to stand outside, while in the rain, while, somebody's using his apartment. And you just kind of see him, kind of hunched over and trying to, almost like disappear. And so, conflicted still in what he was doing, even though he was, obviously never expressed any conflict about it. He was really, it just immediately brings you into his character and appreciation of his character in a way that I think, sets up what happens through the rest of the film. Another one of my favorite scenes, of course, is with the doctor who doctor, and the doctor says to him, that line relatively early in the film, you should be a mensch, right? And Jack goes, what's a mensch? I don't, you've never heard of a mensch. And the doctor says, well, that's being a human being, right? And then, of course, again, this is such great writing, and the scene at the end where Sheldrake, you know, asks, Baxter, what are you quitting? How can you possibly quit? And he says, he kind of echoes that moment. He says, do you know what being a mensch is? Because, he realizes that's what he's become, and that is a great thing, and it really helps us, sort of recognize and put a pin in the transformation that's taken place with him. The Christmas party, that's a very famous scene in cinema. So much going on in that scene, as you can imagine. And again, if you look at it from our eyes today, it's completely immoral. These guys are all making out with their secretaries. But I have to believe this was actually not inaccurate. This was not an exaggeration of the kind of things that happened and what it was like in 1960 in corporate America, and the way women were treated. And again, you could find all this very, revolting and kind of disgusting and degrading and immoral. But this is what Billy Wilder's trying to, make us feel. He's showing us this. He's not commenting on it. He's not saying it's good or bad. He's just showing it to us as what it is. And I think that's, there's a certain power to that. So I don't think he's trying to, exploit us or make us feel something inappropriate. He's just kind of presenting and, in a pretty scathing way, what it was like. And even when you think about what Baxter does, he goes over to Fran, he kind of takes her by the arm, and and he's saying, "Oh, just trust me," and she acquiesces, and it's none of that behavior would go on today, So, but anyhow, she comes along, and they go off to chat and drink paper cups, and so they're drinking, and we know that in a way Fran is starting to trust Baxter, and ultimately will be justified in her trust. But this is all part of the process and the transformation for Baxter. What other amazing scenes? At New Year's Eve, right? Is in this kind of actually it's Christmas Eve when when, of course at this point Fran has found out that about from the secretary at the Christmas party from Edie Adams that he's had many affairs, and she's just one of a line of girls. And then when he tells her he can't stay, or they run out of time, or she doesn't want to screw him, he just gives her $100 bill, and oh, you go and buy yourself something, that he didn't even have time to buy her a Christmas present. It's just awful, right? This is the truth of the love affair, very bare. She's a whore, and he's the John. It's a very ugly scene, but again, the humor is so interesting because her response, because of course she's in tears and crying, is, "You'd think I've learned by now. When you're in love with a married man, you shouldn't wear mascara." I mean, I just think that's absolutely brilliant line. There were a lot of great lines, and of course Wilder and Diamond were known for their great lines. And why? And Fran says to him, "Well, why can't I fall in love with somebody nice like you?" And Baxter says, "Yeah, well, that's the way it crumbles, cookie-wise." And he shrugs, but of course his heart is breaking, and it's breaking for him. And then, of course, at New Year's, Fran repeats that line to Sheldrake, and That's just brilliant writing to me, and the idea of that kind of intricate mechanism of recalling lines at different points, and then having them mean different things, or resonate with other moments in the film previously. And then, of course, the last line has become a very famous, line, because here she is, right? She, it's an incredible, moment, right? She runs off from Sheldrake, and we see her, of course, in this very famous, kind of running. As you know, there are many, many films that always seem to end with this, kind of one of the characters running to get to the climax of meeting their lover. The most famous, of course, being The Graduate. So she's running to see him. He's asserted his independence from, these amoral bosses, and she just rushes in, and she's just shuffling the cards, and so instead of this classic kind of the big kiss, and happy and we'll love each other, it's just this kind of wonderful moment, right? And Baxter's still sort of this puppy dog, so charmed by this woman, and he expresses his love, and she just smiles at him and says, shut up and deal. And that sort of like says it all. And so we don't know what's going to happen next, but we all, so it leaves you with this wonderful feeling of hope, and where you think this is all going to go. I just, again, he always surprises you. Wilder always has kind of a more subtle or sophisticated way of doing something than you might expect otherwise. And to me, that's why I love his movies so much. When a film came out, it sort of doubled its $3 million budget at the box office, and everybody sort of praised it. Though, some people were sort of concerned about sort of it being an immoral movie, and somehow was actually suggesting that this kind of behavior was okay or appropriate. And wow, this sun is really getting interesting. Hang on one second. Okay, that's better. But that was understandable. In fact, Fred MacMurray had a horrible time because people would literally accost him on the street for being in this, dirty, filthy movie, and playing this horrible guy. So that was sort of what made it controversial, was these depictions of infidelity and adultery. But I don't think ever there was this kind of idea was condoning it, or something like that. So again, it's that cynicism, that sarcastic approach to this story, and representing this incredible immoral, and just a period in America that obviously Wilder was very concerned about and wanted to make social commentary about. But as I said in his quote earlier, he was also so conscious of working within a movie industry, and making films that were commercial, and how he was able to embed all of that into what, on another level, is working as light comedy. I just think is absolutely extraordinary, and it was so much fun to watch it again. I'd love to do some of his other movies, and the one that, of course, I think possibly is my favorite is Sunset Boulevard. I don't know if you guys know the movie. And Gloria Steinem's in it. Not Gloria Steinem, Gloria Swanson, the great film star, and William Holden. But anyhow, yeah, and New York, yeah, I see some comments from David and others about the great shots of New York, and they were all quite famous locations that we showed. And Horton Hart at Automat was actually one of my favorite places to go when I was a kid. You put a quarter into these little, you had a little machine, walls and walls of these glass plated little compartments, and inside would sit a sandwich or a dessert, or all these different foods, and they were being fed by people behind. And you could put in a quarter, open this little slot, and take your food, and then you'd go sit down. It was a very unique way of serving food. Actually, probably would be effective during this crisis, as long as we had social distance tables. So you never, you didn't wait online. You didn't have to go down a buffet or anything. But the automats were quite famous at that time. So anyhow, this was fun. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was interesting. Now, what's going to happen now is I'm not quite 100% sure where I have some ideas, but where we're going to go with these Monday night talks. What I'd like to do is start bringing some other guests, like we had Colin Doncaster do that great talk about his experiences on Lord of the Rings. Well, I have another friend who's been hosting a film club called Elevated Film Genre, and he's a producer who lives in Toronto, also an American, but has worked in the business for many, many years in lots of different capacities, also a writer. And he has agreed to come on and do a couple of film talks. He really might do like one a month. I'm looking for other people who might be interested in doing a film talk, if there's anyone you know or you might want to recommend. But I think what we might start doing is doing this every 2 weeks instead of every week. So just talking to a few people, we're trying to figure this out. So stay posted, we'll send out emails, go to, the Westdale, site, and you'll get information there. It's just, it's just a lot of, obviously it's been fun and I love it, but it's a lot of work preparing these every week. So anyhow, we'll see. But meanwhile, I am doing a film club on Friday nights, Hollywood classics, and we've done some great classic films and really focus on sort of the influential films that really help create Hollywood and what Hollywood is and different genres. And we're opening the club up to other individuals who'd like to join us. And it's not quite like this. It's not a film talk. It's more interactive. We do it on the Zoom platform, so we can see everybody, and people comment and make suggestions of films we do, and their own experience of watching the film, and ask questions, and it's kind of been a lot of fun. So that's going to continue on Friday night at 7 o'clock. And if anybody would like to join the film club and get the Zoom invitation, everything else, just either send an email to the Westdale, and they'll connect me with you. And please feel free to join that, and that'll continue to be once a week. The film we're talking about on Friday is actually West Side Story, because we decided to do a musical. We hadn't done a musical before. And although there's so many great, Singing in the Rain and so many classic musicals, West Side Story was actually a very, very influential musical. And this was 1961, 1 year after The Apartment. And of course, based on the famous, stage production, which was 55 or 56, I believe, when it first premiered. And again, what that film looks like today, I saw it kind of when it came out when I was like 7 or 8 years old. It had a huge impression on me. And I think it really affected a lot of modern filmmakers and sort of the approach to musicals and choreography for the film. Instead of just, kind of having a camera, kind of shooting a proscenium, it's really, the camera work is extraordinary. Of course, it's Leonard Bernstein and Stephen Sondheim. This was Stephen Sondheim's first, he only wrote the lyrics. Bernstein wrote the movies, the music, but and then the great Jerome Robbins, who was probably the greatest choreographer of his time. So please join us. That's available actually on Amazon Prime. I think you can get it for free because there's a 30-day trial with MGM Channel or something like that. So if you want to join us, please do. So there won't be a film next week. We're going to skip next week, and there will be one in 2 weeks, and we'll give you plenty of notice of what it's going to be and who's going to be involved. We're also going to try to perhaps bring some guests to these talks so we can, have some filmmakers on. And obviously we don't know when the theater is going to open. We're hoping by early September, but we don't know. And so we're going to continue to do more and more of these online programming. We actually have a music program we're starting to work on that we would do, live from the Westdale without an audience, but, presented online, that I think is going to be very interesting because that's going to have some talk elements to it as well. Um, so what else did I want to tell you? So I think that really wraps it up. I know we're done a little bit early today. Maybe I was talking faster, but if any other comments or questions, I really appreciate you guys joining us. I hope this has been fun for everybody. Uh, Someone asked about the reaction to the suicide attempt in the movie. Well, yeah, that's a very intense and incredible scene, and yes, of course, it's a it's a very controversial religious topic. It's controversial in so many ways. Um, I think again, Wilder tried to, treat that with real gravitas and not, make it some little, just, dramatic moment in the character's evolution. He tried to develop it in a sophisticated way. Again, I felt that's where the doctor and that, actor's performance was just so real and very touching and the way he behaves and, really brought, this more than just what a comedic interpretation of the suicide might have been. I actually love the doctor's wife who comes in with her chicken soup, right? And even though she has one of these Borscht Belt accents, it's just so touching watching her, feed Shirley MacLaine the chicken soup and again, it really took the subject very seriously, and I think that's what you could ask for. Uh, yes, unfortunately, it's true that Wilder later on in his life wanted to continue to do films, and unfortunately did not have a lot of success towards that. And he actually, was very much a subject of sort of ageism, and there was new executives in the studios who didn't even know his films or didn't even want to talk to him, and very, very tragic. And he was very bitter. I actually met him once with Coppola and to talk about a project he wanted to do, but it was very sad because he was quite bitter about what had happened and the lack of support he was getting from anybody. Anyhow, I don't know what to say. He did do, it was his last movie, was Buddy Buddy. Um, so, there we go. That's basically what I have to say. And thank you all again for joining us. And if West Side Story, be prepared. There's a 5 minute overture before the movie begins. So, this is kind of old school musical, but, and there, it wasn't, it was nominated for 11 Academy Awards. It won 10 Academy Awards. It was the most financially successful musical of all time. But it's, of course, about a subject matter, with these juvenile gangs that somehow may or may not feel so relevant today. But of course, as you may know, it was brought back to Broadway a couple of years ago, huge success. And Steven Spielberg has actually just finished or finished before the pandemic filming West Side Story. And there's going to be a huge feature film, directed by Spielberg with an incredible cast that's coming out this fall. So it might be interesting, if you want to watch now and then see what Spielberg does. I'm very curious to see what he did. So anyhow, thank you again, everybody, for joining, and I'll probably see you again in 2 weeks, or if not on Friday, if you want to join us for that. See you all soon.